emotional connection that brings us back to what we eat and how food kind of reacts with our emotions. So the first thing that I kind of tell people is think about what is the true meaning of this season for you. Does anybody have an answer? Family is a great one that a lot of people have. Spending time with their family, counting our blessings, not having to take medications, where we're at, our things to be thankful for. Maybe it's spiritual for some people, but it's really important that we remind ourselves every day, what is this true reason of the season? Because what else comes into play with the holidays? Food. So part of that is our family traditions, our ethnic backgrounds. We think about that everything has to be related to food. I can tell you for one, like I grew up, in the Midwest, and my dad expects the same meal every day for the last 83 years. He wants the exact same recipe. And if I want to make a different recipe other than what he's used to, well, by golly, you better make 2 versions, because he thinks that we better have the exact same thing that he had, when he was 5 years old. So there is something to, as far as that connection of what our traditions are. Traumas, hardships, grief, sometimes brings out a lot at the holidays. Not everybody, it can really kind of make a lot of feelings raw during this time of year. And so that can make us kind of want to use food as a comfort, because they remember that it's triggering those pleasure and pain centers in our brain. So it's important that we're recognizing that the holiday time can be pretty emotional. Really having the awareness of that. Who else can have the mindset or has had the mindset in the past of whatever we do, October 31st to January 2nd doesn't count? These are free months, right? This doesn't count. These calories don't count until we step on the scale on January 2nd. The typical weight gain in the United States during the course of these 2 months is 15 pounds. So then we have that whole new year where we're just trying to get back to baseline before it gets warm and it's summer again. So how is this year gonna be different? The first thing is, okay? So that makes it different this year. For people that are early out of surgery, that's gonna be different. It's also those that maybe aren't going to get sick. Some people are to the point nothing makes them sick, right? They could eat anything. They could do any of that. Nothing's going to make them sick. We have to kind of make this connection that for this time of year, food is not the reward or the treat. That's what we tell ourselves. I've worked really hard. I've sacrificed things. I'm going to use this. It's just today. It's just this time. I deserve it. Is that we have to change that mentality that our food and those traditions is the reward and our treat, and put our focus back on the reason for the season. It's really about the people. It's really about the connections that we make and those new traditions that's so important. So I think that that's important to kind of look at, because whether you use food to cope with pain, whether you use food to cope with grief or to sadness, because those things happen. We all eat for reasons other than hunger at any time. Even after the surgery, it's going to happen. You eat for some reason other than hunger. We have to remember that that instant gratification lasts a moment. You might feel good in that moment, but it doesn't last. So we need to look at those behaviors. We need to think about changing that mindset of how do we just look at food differently? How do we focus on the reason for the season and not that tradition of food? So our first most important thing is that we make a plan now to help make this year different. And I don't care if you're preparing for surgery, if you're newly out from surgery, or you're 10 years out from your surgery. It's setting that mindset that this year is gonna be different. So we have to focus on the emotional part. And if you're so used to having the same things and you're used to having those same foods and those same traditions, we need to look for different recipes. I brought a few for you tonight, like even just, a green bean casserole. We can look at making green beans or a non-starchy vegetable, but if they're loaded in butter and cream of mushroom soup and different things that might not feel as good or be the healthiest choice. So we can just work at finding new recipes to add into that tradition. Some of my favorite websites, and I know that we don't have the handouts and there's pins, or I can write them down for you. I know that some of you I've probably told about foodcoach.me. She's a bariatric dietitian who has tons of recipes, tons of videos, and what I can say about her information is it is everything that I would say. She has a business of a website of doing that, but that's a great place to look. A lot of the recipes that I use are from her site because they're all focused on the lean proteins, the non-starchy vegetables, the same kind of guidelines that we use and talk about in our office. Another website that I like to look at is called Skinny Taste. Skinny, like SKINNY, taste.com. And there is like a low carb section. You do have to kind of think about your guidelines. It's not going to be every recipe is on there is going to be bariatric friendly, but there are a lot of really good options. So those are places to start and to say, I'm going to find a new recipe that really is staying within my guidelines this year. The other part of making your plans for the holidays is trying to relax and refresh. We're all strapped for time these months, whether you're busy at work, you're spending extra time in the car, sitting in traffic, we're having to go shopping, we're having to think about those meals. It's really important to think about that connection of stress management and getting good sleep and how that affects our food choices. Because if you're tired, you're stressed, you're gonna say, oh man, I'm just gonna go through that drive-thru, I'm gonna go do these things. So it's really important that we focus on that basic self-care of taking care of ourselves. Surround yourself with those people that are being supportive of your journey. Having that positive mindset that's really envisioning this year as this healthy, happy holiday is really important. There's a lot that goes to that mental focus. I also want us to talk through common holiday themes. These are questions. These are things that I hear from patients like over the years. So it's coming up on a holiday, so whether that's going to be you're going to get together with family, you know, a week from today, but the food looks so good. How am I going to resist? What would be your answer to that?
I don't know necessarily that you have to completely resist it, because if you deny yourself, then you probably end up eating more, trying to make up for what you're not getting. But if you just take a taste of it, maybe that would suffice.
So having moderation. Right. Thinking about, sticking to your guidelines. If anybody has reacted to eating the wrong foods at certain times, eating too fast, overeating, eating something that is higher carbohydrate and sugar, we have to think of that end in mind when we start. And it's really important to remind ourselves every time we start eating, what does it feel like when you overeat? Think of that meal. We've all had a meal where we've overdone it. Is it worth it to have that feeling where you're like, then you have to go lay down, or you're just feeling miserable for a couple hours after that meal? So we have to start with that end in mind as far as with those guidelines. What about everyone else is eating? The person that's hosting is going to be offended if I'm not eating. They can get over it, right? So that peer pressure, because there is like the peer pressure of those other things. So it's maybe offering to bring things that you know are going to stay within your guidelines. So bringing that new recipe. There's always going to be lean proteins. So you can focus on your lean proteins and maybe making sure that there's some other kind of lean proteins, non-starchy vegetables, so that you are staying within your guidelines and not bringing focus as far as to those meals. Really practicing what your response is, because you have like the mothers after surgery. Is that all you're gonna eat? You're gonna starve if you only eat that little amount. Like the people that might be early on after surgery, they're gonna hound you. They're the mothers. They feel like, oh my gosh, you're gonna starve to death. You're kind of like, well, Isn't this kind of the point? You know, I'm trying to lose weight and focusing on that. You know, your pals. You might have people that you go with that maybe are envious of your weight loss results, or they haven't gone through that, and they're like, you know, oh, come on, it's Thanksgiving. You can do it. It's just one day, you know, and they're kind of pulling you along with them. Or you might have the cops that are looking at your plate. Are you sure you should be eating that? Right? So it's like coming up with those solutions of how do you best cope with those family members. Sometimes it's really, you have to focus that positive mindset ahead of time. You have to be confident in your healthcare team, your surgeons, your dietitian, that we've worked hard to come up with these really important guidelines that we have really found helps people have the greatest amount of success long term, and being confident, you know, in those decisions going through that. And maybe your response isn't, you know, oh, I'm dieting, or oh, I just had weight loss surgery. You begin to come up with these other examples, like, oh, it looks really good. I'm going to get something in a little bit. You all did such a great job. You know, so you compliment, you divert, and it makes, it's that human behavior that kind of takes the pressure off of you. You know, just saying, oh, no, thanks. I just ate, you know, I really just had something. You all go ahead. So I just implore you, because there's those situations, particularly your first year out, that you can run across at different times, not just the holidays. So the more that you're practicing of how do you say no, how do you divert your attention from those food choices that you make, it can really help to alleviate sometimes those awkward conversations, awkward situations. What about, it's a special occasion. It only comes once a year. Is that really true? We have birthdays, we've got cookouts, we've got Memorial Day, Labor Day, Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, you know, let alone all of those, the major holidays. There's always a reason that there can be those. So we have to be really cautious of, is it really the only time that you're ever going to be able to have that food? So, you know, keeping in the back of your mind, having it to those. What about, I'll return to my normal healthy eating tomorrow, otherwise known as the Monday syndrome. This is our biggest sabotager. Of course, you can have small amounts of things that will stay within your guidelines. If you want that one bite of pumpkin pie, or you want that one bite of that special stuffing that's only made at Thanksgiving, sure, you focus on your protein, you do your non-starchy vegetables, you have a couple tablespoons, but it's not, the more that you get diverted, and Thanksgiving Eve turns into appetizers, Thanksgiving Day, and then your Black Friday shopping. So we're gonna have something, it's those days that turn into weeks, that's meal after meal after meal, that very quickly sabotages us. Because the further that you're off track, then the more that you want those things. But if you have a splurge, it's Thanksgiving, and then you say, okay, I'm getting back to my lean and green. You remember those guidelines where we overdo it on carbs, we go back to the lean and green. The quicker you do that, the less those cravings are gonna kind of get back into your life. But the more that you do it, the more those cravings are gonna be there. So, you know, really the best offense is gonna be a good defense. So one of the things that you can do is like get out your calendar. Look at all of the things that are going to be an issue for you, and you work at trying to come up with solutions for those. The first thing to do is throw away the Halloween candy. Who has Halloween candy lurking in their cupboards somewhere in their house?
I did not buy any. I turned the porch light off and just...
Good, good, good. So that's the thing, you know, sometimes we have those little things. We buy Halloween candy, there's a couple pieces stuck up in the cupboard, or we have those things that we're like, oh, it's no big deal. But guess what? When you're stressed out and it's the holiday and you're late, are you gonna think about those 2 pieces of Halloween candy that are still up in the cupboard? You bet you might. You bet you will. So it's like, you know, the first thing you do is you just throw out that Halloween candy. It's planning for success. You just have to take control over that. Thinking about the things. So who's like to bake for the holidays?
Bake every year.
So we're bakers. So what are we going to do this year? How's this year going to be different?
We are baking at my daughter's house, not my house, and everything's going to stay in her house.
Everything's staying there. That's good. So you keep it away. Or do you use it as gifts, or do you use it to eat like throughout the season?
Gifts, and then Christmas Eve, we have Christmas Eve at my house, so she'll bring a tray over for Christmas Eve, but you know, all the leftovers, everything stays at her house, not at my house. Because in the past, I would eat like crazy between Christmas and New Year's to get rid of it.
Right.
So that we start January 1st, you know, healthy eating.
Right.
But we had to eat it and get rid of it.
Yeah.
So
So that's
not
a great
happening.
plan, right? You're doing it different. You can still, have those available. You can still keep that tradition, but you can't have it. It can't be sitting in your freezer. It can't be sitting in the cupboard, or it creates that temptation. Maybe it's doing things that are non-edible gifts, making homemade scrubs or doing different things. What about shopping? Who likes to go shopping? And they get hungry. They think they're not, I'm just going to go out. I'm going to go out for a little bit. And then you're stuck in traffic for 2 hours and you're starving. So it's like, I'm just going to go through the drive-thru just this once, just today. So how do we be prepared? You need to have like your protein bars. You need to keep that protein shake. We need to come up with those alternatives. Be fueled, be prepared. I mean, shopping is always going to take longer than we think it's going to. So we have this great offense of saying, I know I'm going to be out. And if, say I'm out longer and I don't get home to make dinner like I thought I'm going to be, so I have my Quest bar. Or I have a protein shake I can pull out. Stop and grab a bottle of water so that you're on track and you feel good about that. What about traveling? Does anybody travel through the holidays? Either going to someone else's house where you may not have control over to your food, or going in an airplane. Mm-hmm. So that can be a challenging too. So taking things with you, having like that lean jerky, stopping at the store, maybe having non-starchy vegetables, having your refillable container for water, whether you're getting on an airplane or you're in the car. So the first thing that you're doing is always focusing on your hydration. And so you always have something in your hand, and that's the first thing at controlling our hunger. But then you're also just prepared by having those other foods on hand. So if it's like they are really serving something that's completely out of your guidelines that is not going to make you feel well, you really have your backup plan. What about the holiday parties? Does anybody have a holiday party that's going to be serving alcohol or has less food choices that you might be tempted with? So maybe taking your own, like coming up, you can Google sugar-free cocktails or low-calorie cocktails. So you can make things like with Crystal Light. So you get something that's maybe a different type of refreshing drink, but it is something special, but isn't necessarily your alcohol if you're still trying to avoid that, or you're choosing things that are those lower calorie things. So it's recognizing, identifying what are those situations, those triggers over the next couple of months that might cause you issues. So what happens the day of? Dress nicely. We all feel better. We all feel more confident when we're kind of dressed up, wearing things that feel good. Make sure that you're drinking a lot of fluids. Because when we're busy, sometimes when we're out, we're in traffic, we're shopping, we get dehydrated. And that's one of the first things that's going to increase your hunger and then cause you to be sabotaged. So you have to remember that your weapons, and that we have to keep those sugar-free beverages available. Exercising to stay on track. Even the day of Thanksgiving. Develop some new traditions, like, going out, doing something active after the meal, or participating in something as a group where you can be active where maybe you hadn't before. That can be helpful. Don't save up your calories. So normally those holiday days are at weird times, right? Like we usually eat like at 3 o'clock. So it's not a normal time that you would be eating. And a lot of us have this mindset that we're just I'm gonna skip lunch. I'm gonna skip those times so that I'm gonna save up for that meal. But that's where it can make you overly hungry. You may end up eating more. You may end up eating too fast because it tastes good and you have those. So you want to make sure you're eating your structured meal times. You want to have that breakfast. You want to eat some good solid protein like it's your normal kind of lunchtime. so that you're not overwhelmed by that meal. And that's going to help you stay on track and save those calories for the day. Picking smaller plates. It's like, you know, the plate size for even the plastic plates that you go, even the paper plates that people get, I mean, they've turned into a platter. The typical average even dinner plate has increased 6 inches in diameter since the 60s. So it's like, you know, I had a friend, and this was really like, I had seen that statistic, but she bought an older house that had older cupboards, and she had just like gotten married. This was a while ago, but she couldn't even fit her new plates in the cupboards from this house because they're so much larger than what they used to be. Right, so it's like in those cupboards. I mean, and it's our plate size. So we eat with our eyes first. So it's like using those, even the little appetizer plates, trying to stick to that, it's gonna make you feel like you're getting more because we eat with our mind first. So you wanna have those smaller plates, trying to use those. So what about your food choices? What are we starting with? Protein. Ta-da, everybody got the answer right. Good students. So protein first. We're always doing protein first, and every holiday is going to have some good lean proteins. Typically, you're going to have turkey or ham that you can do. So you're always focusing on your protein first. Then what do we move on to? What are we having second? Non-starchy vegetables. So you can have, so trying to make sure that you're bringing a dish that's going to fit into those guidelines where you're doing your non-starchy vegetables. And then you pick your splurge for your carbohydrate. Maybe in that third of a plate you're picking, do you really want the mashed potatoes? Maybe they are the best homemade mashed potatoes that you've ever had in your whole life. Or do you want to choose something else? Do you want to choose in that little bit where you're doing a couple tablespoons of your splurge, you pick one of those other carbohydrates. What can you pass up? Can you pass up the corn? Can you pass up the potatoes, but you really want that couple bites of stuffing? It's thinking about it ahead of time and making that plan. What's that little bit gonna be? And you're gonna focus on your protein first, eating your veggies. So by the time you get to those carbohydrates and you get to that stuffing, you can enjoy it, but it doesn't taste as great. If it's like a buffet, first off, never go through a buffet by grabbing your plate and walking through the line. What's the first thing we do in a buffet? You walk all the way through. You need to look at every food choice that's offered so that you're making your plan ahead of time and we're not focusing on kind of that, you know, just driven by that instant gratification where you pick something early in the line and then you see what you really want at the end of the line, so you put it on your plate, but then you have both things on your plate. So then what do we want to do? We want to eat both things. So you have to make that plan. What's going to be there? And then once you're done, you don't go back through. Move away. Go somewhere else in the house. Go to another area that you're not having those. What about dessert? So if that's what you want for your splurge, use it for your splurge. But you're going to do those 2 tablespoons like as your carbohydrate, that little bit, but you want to try to eat it right at the mealtime. What oftentimes, and I know this happens in our house at Thanksgiving, everybody gets really full from the meal. Then you leave and you go lay on the couch or you watch some football and you have that, and then they pull out the dessert like a couple hours later when everybody has more room and you have that. So you want to make yourself busy. You want to kind of change that time where if you want to have dessert, you have it right away. You have it with your meal. You enjoy that like as your splurge. And we're really careful about that time when we wait a couple hours. Because for some, after the surgery, if you wait and you're eating those heavier fat, heavier sugar things, then you're going to have that crash in your blood sugars. You kind of have that feeling where you don't feel very good. So if that happens and you want to use it as like your next meal or your third meal for the day, you got to go grab your protein first. Go grab that extra piece of turkey or something because that's going to fill you up. So one is it's not going to cause those crashes like in your blood sugar by having that dessert like on an empty stomach, but you're also not going to be able to eat as much, and it's likely going to save you those extra calories. So you try to do that. Be cautious of the alcohol. You know, alcohol is just for so many different reasons. One is we know that there can be that increased absorption of alcohol after like the sleeve or the bypass. So you just want to be cautious if you're like a once a year drinker that you're not like the relative at the holiday this year because you might feel the effects more quickly. Plus, you want to remember it's liquid calories. And, you know, some people, if you're working for active weight loss, some people are really sensitive enough to alcohol that 1 drink a week can slow or halt your weight loss, even outside of some of those other calories that you're eating. So you have to think, is that drink worth it? Do I want to sabotage my weight loss this week and kind of what I'm doing on that drink? Or do I want to come up with my sugar-free, low-cal, like, alternative that I can enjoy instead of just that one drink? It's just about making those choices. Remember to eat slowly. Take small bites. Chew your food really well. I'm a big proponent of getting like those little silverware. If there's like appetizer, like forks available or different things, using that smaller silverware along with your smaller plates really goes a long way of reminding you to eat slowly. Take those smaller bites, chew that food really well, which really helps as far as with those outcomes. And when your meal's over, you brush your teeth, you pop in a piece of gum, you take on a different role this year. Maybe you're gonna, you know, be the family photographer, or you set up some new kind of family game or activity that you're gonna be in charge of so that when mealtime's over, you're not just hanging around the food kind of grazing. So your key is game plan. We have to just focus on what those triggers are, remembering the weapons: hydration, movement, protein first, non-starchy vegetables. Pick your splurge and treat yourself to kind of coping with those emotional issues that might come up during the holiday. So whether that's, you know, giving you the gift of working with a counselor, talking through and identifying triggers for those situations, come up with your groups, come to support group, you know, come up with some kind of community at your church where you're volunteering or getting more involved. If you know that you're alone and that you're having those kind of feelings, that can go a long ways as far as helping through that holiday season. The reason for the season. The blessings, and we're blessed that you're here. Thanks for taking time, sitting in traffic to be with us tonight. Questions or concerns that you have, tips that you have that you feel like helps you through the holidays?